Welcome, everybody. My name is Ursula Ellis. I'm one of the members of the Open UBC Planning Committee. And for anybody who's just showing up, this is the first session that you're attending, just letting you know that the session is being recorded and archived into the Circle repository. Only the person at the podium will be appearing in the video, but if you have questions, someone will come around with a mic so we can capture your voice for the recording. I'm very pleased to introduce Margaret Munro, award-winning senior science writer at Postmedia News. Margaret has written extensively about how the Harper government has muzzled and silenced Canadian researchers, and her talk will focus on Ottawa's muzzles, media offices, and message control. Please join me in welcoming Margaret.
Well, thank you, Ursula. Can you all hear me back there? Yeah? All right. So I have this, I know we're all electronic, but I have this thing for paper, right? So hopefully I won't rustle it too much. At any rate, Devin asked me to come and talk to you a bit about my experiences working with federal scientists and in this increasingly difficult situation where we basically have thousands of government scientists who, in my experience, are happy to talk to the media, but the government has told them that they can no longer do that. So we've gone in just the last few years from a really open system to a very closed system. And as a reporter, I write about science for Postmedia newspapers, which includes the Vancouver Sun, Ottawa Citizen, Montreal Gazette. I think a lot of just general interest newspapers across Canada. And there's a huge appetite for these stories. Like, I've been doing this for years, and really, it's amazing the play these stories will get in the papers if you can get the stories. At any rate, as I say, I've been doing it for almost 30 years now. And traditionally, it's just been an open system. You could phone up a federal government scientist and talk to them. If you want to learn about earthquakes on the west coast of Canada, you would phone up the Pacific Geoscience Center over in Victoria. The scientists would make all kinds of time for you. They appreciate it, and we're actually encouraged to talk to reporters. So we did, I remember going out to the west coast with them. They show you where the last tsunami had come over and deposited sand and eliminated little villages, and it gives you great color for really interesting stories. Or if you want to know about bird migrations, you phone up the Canadian Wildlife Service. You used to be able to, they'd ask you to come out to visit them in their labs out in the Rifle Bird Sanctuary. They would, they'd take you on the tidal flats when they're tagging birds, and you could sort of follow the birds and the scientists as they would sort of track these birds as they flew up and down the coast. So it was often really engaging to deal with these people. Or people like Scott Dallimore. He works with the Pacific Geoscience Center over in Victoria. Now, Scott has been dealing with the media for years. He is an expert on gas hydrates, frozen gas hydrates. There's huge stores of them up in the Canadian Arctic, off the west coast here. And he's run experiments with the Japanese to drill into them, to try and figure out how they might be able to exploit them. But he's also quite concerned about the way they're leaking out of the permafrost up north. So, but as I say, over the years, I talked to myself and many other reporters have talked to Scott many times. He was sort of authorized just to talk to the media. And one time when I was chatting with him, he told me how he said, not only are we doing this experiment on the stuff underground, but we're trying to figure out how much is coming out, because he says in some places in the Arctic, you can actually see this stuff bubbling out of the ground. And I'm going like, really? And he said, yeah, come on up north and I'll show you. So I convinced my editors that that's part of a series on climate change in the north, that we should go out to the Mackenzie Delta. And so Scott took me, and sure enough, I flew into his camp, and there was it was like a pot of boiling water in the middle of the Mackenzie Delta. And then on the way back in the helicopter, he said, let's go stop here. And this is it's an outcropping of permafrost. That is thousands of years old. And here it was just melting like ice cream in the August sunshine. And it was very visceral and real, evidence of what is happening up there. And it sort of gave great color for these stories that we did. So, for example, so this is one of the series that we did on that. And it was, you could see actually his colleague there was standing she could fall into the ocean, right? But, that was the kind of access we had. It was a really open and engaged system. And as I say, the scientists were encouraged to talk to us. But in the last few years, it has become very closed. And the Harper government has taken, media and message control to the extreme. And I noticed a big change, I guess it was in early 2008, where I used to deal with a lot of Environment Canada scientists, and I phoned one of them fellows I knew up because he'd done some paper on ocean currents that I was interested in. And he said, "Oh, thanks for your interest in the story, but we have a new policy. You have to phone Ottawa." And I said, "You do?" Because this guy worked in Victoria. And I said, "Oh." So I phoned Ottawa, and they, "What are your questions? What's the story?" They had no idea. You'd phone them, and you'd say, "I want to talk to so-and-so about this paper in Nature." And they'd say, "What paper?" Like, they had no clue, right? But they were going to be the gatekeepers. So I started asking around, and soon enough, I got a copy of this media relations protocol that had come into force. And the scientists were just horrified, so it didn't take very long to get a copy of this thing. But and this was crafted by the communications branch, by the executive management committee of this communications branch I'd never even heard of. And it's many pages long, but I just pulled out a couple of the relevant pages here. And as you can see, this gives the rationale. And we should have one department, one website, and we should have one voice, which is like not the way the science works at all, right? You have many voices. That's the beauty of it all, right? Anyway, that was the way it was going to be, and this is the way it was going to work. All media calls have to go to NHQ, which is national headquarters. And then the bosses always have to be, like, it became a very top-down thing where the scientists would have to go up, and then media relations would decide. There was only 4 choices there, right? They could they could respond with approved lines. Approved by who? It's still not clear. Well, it is pretty clear, actually, by the minister's office. Or media relations could respond, or you could go to the minister's office, or you could send it off to another department. In no case is a scientist just allowed to speak in this scenario, right? So this went into force, and it just became, it was like a brick wall trying to deal with Environment Canada all of a sudden. And again, this had been a department that had been very open. And when you ask the government what was going on, they just say, this is our new policy. And it was never a policy that was ever discussed with the media or the scientists, as far as I can tell. It was discussed by this communications committee, I guess. At any rate, the Environment Canada was the first, but it soon spread to other departments, and it seemed to hit them at different times. But here's the guy that came out of DFO in 2008, I think it was, or 2009. And I loved some of the scenarios, like, horror, you could be on an ice floe and someone could phone you from a newsroom from, many kilometers away or even continents away. And then it says, no interviews without approval. Like, don't be giving any of those impromptu ice floe interviews. Stick to the media lines. They're all using this media lines thing, right? And an escape from scrums at a regular pace, not a run. You don't want to look like a polar bear. They even had this, cues on cross your arms, can appear defensive, clenching claws and darting eyes. Like, it was like, what is the media monster, right? That you have to. Anyways, this is the kind of thinking that is going on in these media offices, right? It's not like, how can we tell our story? It's like, how do we defend ourselves from these vultures out there? And no one has ever told me what the problem was, right? I have never understood this, but I actually think part of it is a lot of the media, as we all know, is shrinking, right? And a lot of people who work for the media now work for the federal government. I just found out yesterday, the former, what was he called? I can't even remember, CEO of my news service now in the Prime Minister's office is a communications advisor. But hopefully he'll do good things there. At any rate, this is the kind of mentality we're dealing with. So anyways, this is 2010 at this point. Then I just want to give you some of these examples because I think the examples sort of speak volumes. They show how this is working for the scientists. So here's a paper by Scott Dalmore, the fellow from the Arctic. I saw this paper in Nature. It was a slow week. I thought, I'll just do a quick story on this. The journal Nature sends out information to thousands of reporters around the world in a press pack every week. They highlight, these are interesting stories. This was one of them. It was about this prehistoric flood that, there's long been controversy about and debate over what slowed down the currents in the Atlantic about 2,000 years ago. And, and everyone thinks it was ice melt, the massive ice sheets that used to be in North America, and how they, when the ice dams gave way, there was this huge flush of cold water. And some say it went up through Hudson Bay, and others say it went through St. Lawrence. And these guys have come up with some rocky evidence that it maybe had gone up at the Mackenzie Delta. So I thought I was going to do a quick, easy story, right? I was going to phone up my friend Scott. He was going to have an interview, and it would be done in an hour. Well, I phoned up Scott. He says, I don't know what's going on. This is like 2010 now. And up until this point, NRCan had been quite open still. He says, I've been told I got to go through Ottawa. I need their approval, and I'm on my way to Calgary, and I can't talk to you right now, but if I can get the approval, we can chat tomorrow. So I waited. So I put the request into Ottawa as per their new rules. I waited, and I never heard back from Scott. And I, knowing him, I thought, geez, and I'd seen this happen in Environment Canada. I thought, no, I'm not going to put up with this. And I knew that I knew Scott well enough that I knew he wanted to talk to me, right? So it wasn't like the scientist wasn't wanting to talk. So I filed an access to information request to find out what had happened, because he didn't know what had happened either, right? He just knew that the approval never came in time for him to give the interview. Meanwhile, his colleagues, the fellows, this Merton and Bateman, they worked for universities in the UK, which had been putting out press releases. They were so excited about their little paper, right, that they put out a press release helping, oh sure, how high can we jump? But not Scott. Anyways, so I finally, about probably a year later, in response to the access to information request on what had happened to this, why Scott couldn't talk. Like I just put a request in asking for the documentation. Out came the documents, with pages of documents, and it showed that he had to get approval from his minister's office to give an interview, and they just chose not to give the approval. There was no reason given, or if it was redacted out of the documents, but it clearly showed that he had been basically muzzled in the sense that he couldn't do the interview. So, of course, we do a story, and this story was way bigger than the little story ever would have been about the flood, right? So there was a huge reaction. And we did stories on that Environment Canada policy, and there was, both times, lots of reactions. Editorials denouncing the government, because the document showed they had to look at the implications for the minister of this flood that happened 13,000 years ago. Then that information control has gone too far. They were just roundly denounced for all this. The journal Nature did an editorial denouncing them, but this government just seems to say, this is our policy, and I've been badgering them for years to explain the rationale for this, and I've yet to see anything. But they just seem a bit impervious, or I guess they just don't care about the constituency that cares about these things, or it seems to me that's maybe the rationale. And then we have this famous case now of Christy Miller. Now, Christy Miller is a DFO scientist. She works in Nanaimo. She's a real leader in the field of genomics, and she can basically take a salmon and, well, I'm not sure exactly what she does, but she can do a genetic analysis of all the viruses on it and tell you, what's wrong with these, why these fish are dying, because some years, as many as I think 95% of the sockeye that are trying to make it up the Fraser River don't get there, and they don't understand why. And her paper actually suggested that there might be some kind of leukemia, and that's all it said. It just had this loaded word about leukemia in salmon. I thought, if I would have written a story saying salmon on West Coast have leukemia, the minister would have gone crazy, right? But they wouldn't let us interview her. So anyways, she's got this landmark paper in the journal Science. Journal Science, like Nature, sends out press packs to every reporter interested or who agrees with their embargoes. So 7,000 reporters around the world got this notice about this suffering salmon on the BC coast, said, if you want more information, phone up Christy Miller or the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So the reporters started lining up to talk to her. This is Monday morning in January of 2011, I think it was. And they said, oh yeah, she'll be available. The PR office for the DFO here in Vancouver saying, yeah, we hope she's not available right now, but we'll get this interview together. And we waited, never heard from her, and phoned back the next day, still no Christy. Oh, she's in some sort of hearing. Oh, no. But we're still hoping to do it. And you could see what had happened was the PR people really wanted her to talk. Christy Miller wanted to talk. But the thing is, they had all of them had sent everything to Ottawa, and they'd actually sent it weeks in advance because they knew this was all coming out. But it went up through the department's media office in Ottawa. It went up to the minister's office, the deputy minister's office. They all signed off on her doing these interviews. Actually, they even signed off on a press release that was, because some of her co-authors were here at UBC. They all signed off on this press release. And at the very last minute, it went off over to the Privy Council office, it turned out. And they said no. So anyways, but none of us knew this what was going on. They just were stonewalling and saying, well, we hope to do this. So, yeah, here's the paper. And as you can see, like, really, one could not write a story on the basis of this. And it did, I don't know if it says it in the abstract, but it does talk about leukemia. But, you know, you need the woman to explain this, right? Like, somebody's got to explain what this means. So you need to do an interview. So here's Greg Rasmussen. He's a national reporter for CBC Radio. And if you start at the bottom, I'm going to apologize. This is not in the, but you can see he started on Wednesday. This was one of a series, but I think he started on the Monday. And here he is looking for the interview. What happened in the interview? This is on Wednesday. So sorry about this. It will happen tomorrow. Then here he is at next morning. He's like getting mad now. He says, I need to nail this interview down in the next few minutes. He never got the interview either. None of us got interviews. So again, I filed an access to information request. And months later, out came, like I think it was 836 pages of documents about how they had dithered back and forth. What are we going to do about the media? How are we going to do this? And in the end, some analysts in the Privy Council office said no to interviews. They didn't like the press release that had been written with UBC saying too much concentration on dying salmon. At any rate, it was another huge story, right? And this happened to come out just as the Cohen Commission was underway. And the government, after they'd said no, they never gave a reason to why she wasn't available. But then they came up with this excuse that it was because of the Cohen Commission. But now the Cohen Commission has come and gone, and Christy Miller is still not talking. So, anyways, that case, again, tons of headlines, the government was denounced, but they just said this is the way it is. Then 2011, we had the case of the Ozone Scientists. So here are these guys that go up to the Eureka and way up on Ellesmere Island. They release these weather balloons. They go up and they can study what's going on with the ozone layer every spring. And in the spring of 2018 or 2011, there was this unprecedented hole in the Arctic ozone, and it sort of was centered right over where the Canadian scientists were. So they had a heyday making all the measurements and watching this hole move around. And several of these people are with Environment Canada, including David Tarasak, who I dealt with over the years. I phoned him up. I said, David, can I speak to you about this? He says, I'd love to talk about it, but, you got to go through the media office. So I phone up the media office, in the Environment Canada media office, and they sent me this email. While an interview cannot be granted, we are able to provide this response. And they just gave me this boilerplate stuff, thinking, well, you can write the story with that. These are their approved lines, right? But instead of doing that, well, I did quote from that, but I actually quoted from that the interview cannot be approved. And you think by this point the government would know, right? Again, more really nasty headlines, because in there it talks about how he couldn't do the interview. And the minister went in. Then we got the documents, and it actually showed that, let me just see. Yeah, here it is. I love this. This came, we did another access request. I know it came all the documents showing what had happened. But it says, here the bottom one, it shows that here are the proposed responses that are with the ADM, the Assistant Deputy Minister, for review right now. And David writes back and he says, I haven't given you any proposed responses. So he was basically going to be told that here, and this is stuff they sent me, right? Anyways, we did more stories on this. And by this point, the government is being roasted like daily. The NDP and everybody's just all over this issue, right? And the minister, and they just keep saying, no, we're not nothing scientists. We talk to thousands of reporters every day, and like about the weather or something. They come up with these numbers. And so I said, where's the 13,000 interviews you gave? We're still waiting. Here we are 2 years later. But the government and the minister was adamant, we're not Muslim scientists. They tried to blame the reporters. It was just bizarre. What was going on. But as part of this package that came out in the Tarasak Access to Information, this was briefing notes that were made for Karen Dobbs, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister of Environment Canada. And it shows about how the media system works. And where it says other media calls, like it shows how they can do 50% of their calls are about the weather. They can do those. You can talk about the weather without approval. But anything else, you see what they've got? Questions? It says, at the bottom there, it says, when the subject matter relates to the issues listed above, these guys it has to go to the intergovernmental affairs or government priorities, blah, blah, blah. Media relations will send the request to the Privy Council office. The Privy Council office is like the arm of the Prime Minister's office. Like they're worried about stories about, you can see what they're talking about. Yeah, and the questions, the last bullet there, questions on the process or proposed process to protect species such as polar bear, caribou, anything related to climate change, wildlife, water quality. Like the Privy Council office is all over. Like we're talking about a study. Anyways, this is the clearest. So this is from 2011. So this is the update on this earlier policy. But they've never told the media what the real policy is. But it's pretty clear. So what happens? You phone them about anything, it takes days to get a response. So there'd been enough controversy, and like, these are just my examples. My colleagues have as many again, right? There was one fellow at the Ottawa Citizen, he wrote a story about, he wanted to do a study on a Canada-U.S. snow, a story on a study of snow in Canada that was being done by U.S. and Canadian scientists. So we phoned up the U.S. scientists, worked for the federal agency down there. He had the interview, and the interview done in 15 minutes, right? Phones up the NRC guys. Well, he waited days. There was 11 high-paid bureaucrats touched it, and how are we going to deal with the response? Oh, is this sensitive? Does this go to the minister's office? Went on and on, pages of paper and emails went flying. He never got the interviews. But again, he wrote a story like the ones I do. Just ridiculous. Like, the government just looks ridiculous. At any rate, there had been enough of them at this point by the spring here that the environmental law group at UVic pulled all the examples together and put it in a document. And they actually made a formal complaint to the Federal Information Commissioner, who said, yeah, I'll look into this. So she's still looking into it. Who knows what she's going to say. But she took it on, and she's looking at the way 7 different departments, Environment Canada, the whole bunch of them, right? So I don't know when, they don't really tell us when these will be, the issue will be resolved, or her findings will be made public. But that's sort of in the offing still. But it was funny, when I did the story on the commissioner saying that she would do it, I went to the Minister of Science office. I said, oh, would you comment on this? Because he had originally said, Mr. Goodyear had originally said in February, when the law group had made the accusations about it violating the Access to Information Act, that he said, at the time he says he was rejecting the premise of the accusation. This is when, and then the Information Commissioner said, no, this is a valid criticism. I'm going to take this on. So I asked for his comment. Well, no, he didn't want to give a comment, but at the bottom you can see he wanted me to put in, they had this boilerplate answer for the minister. He's on approved lines as well, right? Government scientists and experts are readily available to talk about their research. And then he has this number of the 13,000 media interviews. But he was unavailable. He refused to comment and has still not commented on this. And he's now moved on, and his predecessor is being no more forthcoming. So basically, we've got a situation where there's all kinds of stories happening, and you need government scientists, or you'd like to know what the government is thinking on these things. So when this Fukushima accident happened in Japan, I remember trying to get to Health Canada to say, well, are you monitoring this? You know, what are you doing? No, they wouldn't talk to us. They didn't. They refused to have anything to do with this. This summer, there was this volcano that started erupting up in the Alaska Peninsula, and there was concern it was going to affect air travel. A friend of mine who works at the Globe and Mail was telling me how he phoned up Transport Canada just to get their comment. And this is like a routine kind of thing, right? You think that in the morning the media office think, okay, so the media's going to call us about this Alaskan volcano. What are we going to say? And it's like, this is pretty basic stuff for a media office. They never got back to the guy all day because they had to wait for someone in Ottawa who somehow couldn't stop what they were doing to just say it's okay to talk to the media about this. So there was, we ended up getting a story about these volcanoes, and it's all quoting Americans and no Canadians at all. Heaven forbid that there would be a very serious accident in this country. I just don't know what kind of federal response they would be able to come up with. If it was a very timely situation, I just think they'd be paralyzed. Or given the way they're acting now, anyways. And then this is maybe more closer to the heart of some of you folks. There's, we're still getting stories, but now they're all negative stories, right? So the federal fisheries libraries, there was a whole series of them across the country, and the government just decided they had to spend a fortune on these collections, right? I think there was 11 of them, I believe, and now they've taken it down to 2, and they've just like dumpsters of books that are going out. But how valuable this stuff is a bit debatable, but the scientists, like anything that's cut now, the scientists are so sensitive and so sensitized to this that they're just really feeling assaulted. So, but again, we tried to get DFO to comment on this. It took weeks to get them to even give us basic information. Oh, sorry, don't worry about that. That's unreadable. Okay. Then we have the situation up in the oil sands, where here's, they just, you could see them way out into the horizon. Like, I don't know if any of you have been up there, but this is a massive development, like massive and controversial, as you all know. But an environment, and the federal ministry is saying, we're monitoring, everything's under control, no pollution. And the studies have come up saying, oh, there's a lot of pollution. They say, no, we've got this thing that shows that there's no pollution. Everything's under control. And one of my colleagues, Mike D'Souza in Ottawa, did an access to information request because he was looking for some of their reports. And these were the instructions that came out showing what the scientists were allowed to say. So this is their approved line. So here was this line. Have you ever been approached about paying for the research? Scientist. I'm a scientist. I'm not in a position to answer that question. But I'd be happy to refer you to the appropriate spokesman. Like the idea that they don't trust them to do anything. Like, oh. Anyways, this is the kind of stuff that your and my tax dollars paying for. But you can still find, actually I think this is a bit the scientists being a bit subversive, but the team at Environment Canada, Derek Muir, he's a very internationally acclaimed and famous scientist, is lead author on this paper here. He was going to the CTAC meeting, which is the Society for Environmental Toxicology in America or something, last November. And in the abstracts for the conference, there's what was all their findings. It was very detailed. You can see how it talks about how the pollution from the oil sands has been found at the bottom of lakes 100 kilometers away from the upgraders. And it gave a lot of detail for an abstract, right? So at this point, you have them over a barrel. They know you're going to do the story. So I phoned them up and said, okay, I want to talk to Derek Muir about this abstract, right? Oh, we don't. They denied. They kept saying up until then, you can't talk to these people because the science hasn't been published. Now they're at a meeting talking about it, and we have the information. So then they say, okay, we'll arrange an interview. I waited all week. I started on a Monday. It was a year ago, actually, and it was November. And I remember it's a Remembrance Day week, and they finally arranged the interview. They said, okay, Remembrance Day Monday, 9 o'clock, you can talk to him. It's like, what? Anyways, so you do that. You get on the phone and you talk to the guy. But it's like, they sort of make it, like, we'll let you have the interview, but we're going to screw you in the process, right? Like, you're coming on your day off to do this thing. But it's like as if they were, and I know that Derek Muir was sitting in his office all week. So anyways, we got the story, and then, I had to sort of really push them. And the minister's office at that point sort of got him. They're trying to pretend, oh yeah, we're going to help you, but they're not helping. Anyways, we ended up with a pretty good story of that one. But you really have to persevere. But you can still get the stories, some stories. And then this spring, this was a massive cracking. Within a week, I don't know if you can see, but there's Alaska at the bottom of that map, and then Banks Island, which is in the western or the eastern Beaufort. Like, that is thousands of kilometers there, or at least 1,500 about. And that ice cracked in a big windy storm within a week, I think it was. Apparently, it was just spectacular. So the ice watchers are all like, oh my God. And so NASA and NOAA, using data that the Canadian Ice Service partly collected, put out a little video showing how the ice had cracked. They issued a press release in a summary. No mention of the Canadian Ice Service. So it actually contributed to all this. So you could do the story based on that. So I was going to do the story based on that. And if Environment Canada wouldn't have talked to me, it would have made them look even worse. So in that case, they did talk. Like, I think it took just the morning to finally get the woman on the phone. But in the old days, I would have just phoned her up and she would have been able to talk to me. But yeah, she said it was just spectacular. And in fact, the woman, Trudy at the Ice Service, had helped the NASA people. But there's no proactive putting out any of this information. This came out of the U.S. agencies. So basically, we've gone from what was once a really open system to a very closed, as you see, and very tightly controlled system. And a lot of people are really mad. Now, I don't know. I collected this thinking, oh, it was sort of cute. But then I looked at it last night and I thought, what does that mean? And then I finally realized that it's the scientist is talking to the beaver, the people, right? That's their little communication lines have been cut. I thought they cut his tail off or something. Anyways, so lots of it. There's editorial cartoons denouncing. We've got this. I don't know if any of you were involved in this, but the science protests, there's been 2 now. I went to the one down here in Vancouver in September, and it was Like, I think the government is actually sort of ignoring these situations. Like, I think they've just said, oh, those are activists. We don't. And I must admit, there was David Suzuki and Lisa Borborman. And, like, they just sort of glommed onto the issue, sort of, which is good. But I think the government just discounts a lot of these people because they say, oh, those are the regular complainers about everything, right? But anyways, there was a lot of people turned out, a lot of young scientists, and it's partly out of frustration. Like, there's just no jobs for a lot of these people, which is tragic. The government's not hiring, they're laying people off, they're trimming programs, and then they're muzzling scientists as well. So there's just incredible amount of frustration among young scientists, for sure. And the senior scientists that I know are horrified. Like, I have several people who I talk to quite regularly who have been, like, these are world-class scientists. They're just shaking their heads as to what's happening to the government. But it does seem the government wants to dismantle their science capacity. They don't want to be, like, I always had these government guys people had the great jobs because they didn't have to teach, right? But I think they actually, now they're just being eliminated. But some of them are speaking out. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with this website, but that's the site there. But it's a government scientist. He always has these funny pictures. There he is. He's put tape on his mouth there. But he's got all kinds of funny masks. But he writes a column from the inside, and he's actually been publishing quite a bit of interesting stuff. So people are keeping the government honest. And then, but now we've got this new minister of science who replaced Goodyear. So Greg, what is his last name? I'm forgetting even. Greg Rickford, I think it is. Yeah. So there was a big fight over the experimental lakes facility that was closed in Ontario to save $2 million. And they put in this new minister. I thought, well, maybe they're seeing the light finally. So we have Rickford come in, and he has yet to, I believe, give an interview on anything. He just keeps issuing little written statements on things. But this came out a couple of weeks ago. It's from his riding association. And in it, on the third paragraph, there, you can say, a group of radical ideologues have led a campaign of misinformation about Greg's work to protect the experimental lakes area. So this is the MP that's in the riding where they shut down the thing, right? And now the facility has been transferred to it's been sort of semi-saved by the Ontario government and a group in Winnipeg. But it turns out, I was just reading yesterday, how the facility can't no longer do the experiments it does because it needed a federal permit, and they don't have that agreement anymore. But anyway, so here's what the minister's office sending out to his conservative association, basically calling the scientists who are actually just fighting to save their facility a bunch of radical ideologues, right? Which didn't go down very well. But again, the minister didn't have much to say about that. And then just yesterday, this report came out from the Professional Institute for the Public Service, which is basically the public service union in Ottawa. And they did a survey it was an internet survey that was done by one of the big polling companies. And just over 15,000 federal scientists responded to this survey. So it was sort of obviously selecting the people who were most upset. But look at what they're saying here. It's just horrifying. 90% of the scientists said they don't feel they can speak freely. 24% were asked to exclude or alter information for non-scientific reasons. 50% felt the public health or the environment had been compromised by decisions that were being made. 74% say the sharing of science finding is too restrictive, and 71% said policy had been compromised by political interference. Like, this is just horrifying kind of statistics, right? And the government, again, the minister said, he issues a statement saying, there was 1,500 interviews last year. It's the same line, and I think they're all about the weather. But the government is there, they just stonewall, and they just seem to, we're not going to engage on this issue. And so it's just, this is sort of the situation as it is now, and it's, to my mind, it's deplorable. Like, I believe in information, I believe in the sharing of information, and I think for scientists it's the same. Like, it's like they do science because they want to share information, and they want to share knowledge and advance knowledge, and if they can't talk about it, it's just tragic. So, every once in a while there'll be cases where they look like they might be going to open up a bit, but it just doesn't seem to be happening. And in fact, last month I've been working on a series of stories on microbes in the last little while, and I was at Winnipeg at the National Microbiology Lab a couple of weeks ago, and I was sort of amazed when I phoned them up. I said, I want some information on this bacteria that causes lots of disease. And they said, oh, why don't you come out and visit the lab? And I said, really? You want me in your laboratory? Like, I was taken aback that they would invite me into their facility, right? And I get there, I fly all the way out there, and they don't, it's like, oh, well, here's the storyline. Here's our machines, right, about how cool all this equipment is. I said, no, but I told you I want to talk to this scientist, this one guy, about these bugs. Oh, they wanted me to talk to him for like about 5 minutes, and then they were going to trot me along like a little puppy dog and sort of frame the story. And I wasn't going along with this. Like, I was trying to be polite, right? But they practically kicked me out of the building because I wanted to talk about this other microbe. Anyways, it was just a bit bizarre. So I think they are, in that way, trying to be a bit proactive, but it's, they have so burned off the media that we're not going for it. So I will stop there. Oh, this is more details on that. There's a lot of information on that survey on the web if you just look at it under the public service group. And I will stop there. So I thought maybe if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So how many days of time?
Plenty of time for
Yeah.
questions.
Okay.
Have you ever done a calculation of how much government money is being spent on the emails back and forth to control the scientists? I mean, it must be gobs of money.
Oh, well, no, I haven't, but I know Jeffrey Simpson at the Globe and Mail, he did a column a few years ago, or a couple years ago, where he said that the number of media officers, he'd added them all up, somehow he got a number, it's like 2,000 or something, information and media officers in Ottawa, and they're all probably taking out at least $100,000, and it's like, what are they doing, right? They're not giving the information, but it was like a huge, yeah, it's been massive, but no, it would be nice to find out, though.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have my own ideas about this, but I'm wondering about, from your perspective, why do you think this change has happened over the past few years?
Well, I try not to speculate too much, but I think the Harvard government doesn't like the media. There's no, I think they thought science journals, they could just sort of, just like little flies, they could get rid of them, right? Because the way they treat the political reporters is like, I can't believe they go for this. You know, they control how many questions they can ask, and they really herd them like cattle. And like last week at the throne speech, they wouldn't even let them in, right? They were going to let a camera in, no reporters. So there is a real almost disdain for the media, and I think this is part of that. And I also think part of it is the media is shrinking. The government thinks we don't need the media filter. And I've heard PR people from the federal government say that, like, oh, we don't need the media filter anymore. We'll just go directly to Canadians. How they're doing that, they think by putting something on a website, they're going to get to the Canadian public or through Twitter or whatever. But so that's part of it. And I also think there's been the rise of media messaging generally as a phenomenon. Like, there are way more people employed in media media relations offices and media messaging companies than there are journalists. And so I think those groups have really taken hold in Ottawa as well, as they have in lots of industries. So it's a combination, I'd say. What do you think is causing it?
Yeah, a lot of that similar kind of thing. And I mean, I guess there's a lot of controversial projects that the government is funding. If you brought up here, like the Tar Sands project, and I suppose that from their perspective, the less the public knows about that kind of thing, the better it is for their project to continue on.
Yeah, but some of them, like the experimental lakes, really, they haven't been written about in years, right? There's some little experiments, like they weren't big, high profile, and they just, no, we're taking that out, right? Oil sand, like in the oil recovery group, the contaminants group out of the Bedford Institute out east, world leaders, gone. It was just the guy went off to Australia or something after he lost his job. They just took out his whole division. It doesn't make it, and to me, it's so much of it. It creates such bad press for them, but they don't seem to care, and which is baffling to me because I'm thinking it doesn't really fit with what they're after, right? But, sort of blown up.
Anyone else?
It seemed in some of the papers that you mentioned the second or third authors were often from academic institutions. And have you seen any discussion among the colleagues of the academic partners with the government scientists about this phenomena?
Well, I know, like in the case of the Christy Miller paper, that their colleagues were from here at UBC, and I remember they were interviewed, right? And they felt a bit weird. It's like, this is Christy's paper, we're the second authors, but they were doing the interviews. But she was on the phone to them, right? But they're just a bit baffled, I think, and they don't really, because I think academics. Like, I phone up an academic and they just start talking, right? The way the government scientists used to talk. And to them, it's like, I just think it's another world. And they don't really, they don't deal with that part of it. So they don't really see it that much, I don't think. But I think they're just shake their head. But some, like people like Andrew Weaver, he's been talking about, he's the one that, that's muzzling. but he's been some of them have been very vocal about it. But I also find a lot of them, federal scientists, I'm sure you're now, a lot of them started, and I don't think the government likes this either, but they started, when things started going south with the government financing for their internal research, they all started moving over to the universities, which I think to some of the young scientists, as I know, is a bit of a bone of contention, because the jobs that are available in academia, increasing, you get these federal people coming in to take over where we're decreasing some of the opportunities. But anyways, so they'll come in, and so when you phone them up, they say, well, I'm talking as a University of Alberta scientist, not as a DFO or a GSC person or something. So they seem to, they're playing it that way. So I would think that the academic guys would know about it that way. But some of them have been very vocal, like David Schindler. But do you hear, like, what is your sense of it, of what the scientists in academia have to say about it, or what academics think?
I'm not sure I'm tied in enough in the publishing to know that sense. I know definitely the research scientists that I work with tend to be very happy to talk and really enjoy talking. So,
well, that's the way the federal. But do they say anything about their federal colleagues?
Not to me directly, but again, I'm probably not tied in enough to that side of things.
Yeah, but I have never actually. I've been trying, and I have yet to. I've heard, but I haven't seen cases. It's one thing to not talk to the media, but it's a whole other thing not to publish the results, right? But that survey that came out yesterday implies, at least, that these scientists are not allowed to publish their findings, which is even worse. Because, Christy Miller may not have been able to talk about her paper or explain what it meant, but at least it was out there. Whereas, but the number, and there was a report came out in the summer, I saw a report that said how NRC's publishing rate was way down, way down. Which implies either they're not doing the work, or if they're doing it, they're not publishing, which is even worse, I think.
Just a question, if you've seen any indication of this trend playing out for federally funded research grants that go to universities?
No, and I'm amazed. People like Andrew Weaver still gets funding. I don't know what he's done with it now. He's a Green Party guy. But you sort of wonder, like because if scientists are critical of the government, I would think, and I've heard that that goes on a bit. Like what'll happen is, I've heard that like NSERC committees, the message will go to the vice president of the university, like to get that person to shut up. But I've never seen it documented, so I don't know if that's actually true. But I know NSERC, which is supposed to be a straight-up granting agency, like they won't talk. They stopped talking to reporters years ago. They're not allowed, and every press release that comes out of there starts with the minister's name. And it was just really sad. So you used to be, NSERC had a PR person, they'd phone you up, oh, this is a great project, we just gave $10 million for this, and they don't do that anymore. But I did write a bunch of stories about the misconducts of that researchers, so they might, but they're not, I've not seen a lot of stories coming out of there, but I can't imagine that this kind of government, I don't know, but I haven't seen it, but if you know of any cases, I'd be interested to know.
Have you noticed any difference in response from government depending on who's asking the questions?
You mean,
like which media, which
Well, they tried to single out the bad apples like me, right? Like, we're not talking to her anymore. And it just kept blowing up in their face. So now they actually jump when I phone, right? So usually they'll pay attention when I call at least. But I know a lot of the young freelancers that I work with, they just get no response at all, which is terrible, right?
But does anybody get a response?
Well, some will get a quicker boilerplate response. You get these written approved statement kind of things. And if you're from a mainstream media, like the Postmedia or CBC or the Globe and Mail, you will get a response within the day. But if you're a poor freelancer, like, you can wait weeks, even for just a basic comment, or you'll just get no response at all. But I think they've done such a good job of alienating all media that they don't seem to play favorites so much anymore. But if they could, they would, I think. But maybe Peter Mansbridge seems to have unusual access.
Hi, Margaret. I was just wondering, given that what appears to be the government's stance of just denial and continuing on in this vein, have you been at all disheartened by or heartened by the public outcry about all of this?
Yeah, I was amazed, actually, because when this first started happening, I was furious. I thought, what do you mean they changed the rules? These people, I dealt with them for years, but now I can't talk to them? Be like, what? So I took it really sort of personally, right? I was thinking, this really changes my job, and they're just imposing. So I was sort of angry, right? And I remember sitting in my office writing this story when I got these documents showing, how they wouldn't allow these scientists to talk. And I thought, am I the only person that cares about this? Like, I wrote the story. I wasn't sure my editors would be that interested. I wasn't sure the public would be interested. So I was quite heartened by the response. And it's taken on a life of its own. There's all kinds of people pontificating about it now and stuff, which is great, right? Because, as I say, the government did try. There's a few reporters, they tried to just sort of say, oh, those are just... Peter can't stand up in the House of Commons and say, oh, that's just some reporters wanting us to jump to their schedule. Well, we don't jump to their schedule. And, meanwhile, in the journal Nature is publishing their papers. But so they tried to alienate a few reporters. So it has been quite not reassuring, but good. Like, it's been heartening to see this response. But the disheartening part is that it doesn't seem to have had. The government doesn't seem to they don't care about the response. Like, I sort of have this sense that the government thinks that's not, those kind of people, they never voted for us anyways, so we don't care about them. And that's my sense of it, but I may be wrong in that, but it just, like, they don't, like, to have so many people caring about something and to have no real thoughtful response just seems bizarre to me if they do want to win anybody over.
Thank you very much. Oh, one more.
Have you found this has been going on for a little while now, and I'm wondering, you kind of talked about how, at least at the beginning, it was very kind of personally annoying, but has your day-to-day, week-to-week work routine kind of changed to take into account the new reality, or?
Well, yes, in the sense that I used to be able to think, oh, there's a quick story, I'll just do that little story. I don't even try, because I know what used to take a day will take a week. So you sort of look at the study, at the story or the report or anything, is this worth the trouble to sort of pursue it? Because you know it's going to swallow your whole week. So it's changed in that sense. But actually, in a way, I think it makes me less tolerant of all this manipulation, the manipulation that goes on. So I actually spend more time trying to look into stories that are more behind the scenes kind of stories. So it makes for better stories, but they're harder to get. So you have to have a very patient editor, because what happens is now, like, we're inundated with press releases, these prepackaged stories. They come with pictures, graphs, movies, quotes, and they just want you to repackage the story, and it's just like stenography, right? And so that comes out of the scientific journals, it comes out of the universities, it comes out of a lot of places, and the government never did quite get the swing of that. So, but all of that it's a bit of a put off, but the more and more of it's dictating what's on the news. But I think more and more reporters are questioning all of it and trying to get a bit more back to things that are really news. So there's pros and cons to it. But it has changed the way we work, for sure. You're welcome.
Very thought-provoking presentation and discussion. Everyone, please join me in thanking you.